Our last class on our last discussion is on women in India, and we've sort of been building up to this for some time now. And it's our last, not the only reason. There are many reasons India is so fascinating, but its population will surpass China's in the next 5 to 10 years. So it will be the most populated country on the planet. So just its sheer size, the scale of this country makes it compelling and fascinating to follow, and an important country to keep studying. It has a similar population issue that China has, which is it has a significant sex imbalance between men and women. It's a legacy of a country that is developing, getting wealthier, is less agriculturally focused, and like almost all developing countries, as they go from poorer to richer, and they go from agricultural to manufacturing and service focused, they go through a period of preferring boys to girls because boys can provide more labor, because boys stay with the family, and when they marry, the girl comes and leaves their family. So with a boy, you don't lose a child, you gain a child. And in the urban, affluent, highly educated parts of India, you don't see as much of this dynamic at all, of a preference for boys. But in the rural areas, less developed, less affluent, less educated, you have seen this preference, and it still persists to this day. And so for years and years, this preference for having boys has resulted in a huge distorted ratio of girls to boys and women to men in India. And it results in about 37 million more men than women. Right? And we don't know exactly how this will play out over the next 80 years, but there's a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. But even in the best case scenarios, there's still going to be a lot more men than women. If that's the best case, the worst case, it could be, it could be a lot. It could be 108. It could be 180 women, 100 men, and this creates a set of dynamics that are, again, tens of millions of men who don't have great job prospects. They have limited job prospects. For that reason, they don't have great prospects for getting married. They have very bad prospects. And as a result, they also have very limited opportunities to live a full life, a married life, a companion life, a sex life. Those are all this is more traditional culture. And so sex tends to reside more within the confines of marriage. Marriage is not as accessible for millions of men. You have a lot of men, millions of men, who have a sense of desperation, a sense of anger, a sense of frustration. And that can be tapped into for political purposes. And that's part, by no means the only, but it is when you have that many people angry, there are politicians, and Narendra Modi is one of them, that can tap into that and use that as fuel for political purposes. And so that's what some of these, the BJP's sort of support groups and youth groups definitely tap into this anger. And it's for them, some of the enemies are secularism, Islam. They have a convenient array of enemies. And meanwhile, as you know from all the readings and the documentary and what we're studying in terms of women in India, women still have extra obstacles and hardships. Right? Gender equality rankings, China's quite high. India is extremely low in terms of gender equality. India has one of the biggest gender gaps in the workforce of any country on the planet. There are approximately 200 to 220 million women who, in a preferable situation, would be in the workforce. Preferable for them in terms of their development, their potential for earnings, and then for the country's economic development. Those are people who could be working for themselves to their own betterment, and then collectively, they could be working for the betterment of the country's economic growth. Female labor force participation has actually been going down in India. I mean, around 20%. I have seen some estimates as low as 7% in the formal workforce. That holds back economic development, that holds back wealth per capita. And so it's not good for the country economically. It's a lost opportunity. It's a missed chance for the country to grow and be wealthier. And India needs women to work. It's 200 to 230, 40 million women could be in the workforce. If they were in China, they would be in the workforce. And there's all kinds of things that go along with that. You watched for this class, just the difficulty of feminine hygiene products and the ways in which the lack of access to that holds back women developing educationally and independently. You watched the documentary on the traditional marriage expectations and the extent to which parents are very involved, even with young women who are very educated and professional. Many of them do feel strong societal pressures to be married relatively younger, not older, and how the role that parents play in the search process and the matching process and the heightened levels of anxiety and stress that introduces. And then, as you saw in the documentary, there's 3 women who are profiled. One of them is she's already working when she's married and is hoping she's going to stay working. And she ends up kind of in the kitchen back home in a domestic situation. It's one of the key features. If India wants to really grow economically, they have to find ways to enable half of their population to be as gainfully employed and professionally engaged and developed as men. But that also raises this huge question about, is it even inappropriate to tell other countries they need to do this or that, or change their culture, change their views of women or of race or religion or sexual orientation? There is an awkwardness associated with that because there's a sense that no, you shouldn't be doing that. That's inappropriate, especially for Westerners, white Westerners, people who used to run colonial empires. The last thing they should be doing is back opining about the countries that they used to have colonial empires over. So there's an awkwardness to it. And yet, if you're just looking at it from an economist standpoint or a human development or a human capital development, you can't help but conclude that people need to be as educated and as professionally engaged as they want to be, as they can be, both for their benefit and also for the country's benefit. Which brings us to the last case study, which is fascinating. And when we did the semester C trip, it was a field trip that we took. In the southern part of India, there's an industry that is now curtailed because it's sort of been banned, but it's commercial surrogacy. It's poor Indian women essentially renting out their womb to other Indian couples, and especially Western tourist couples who either are infertile or they can't have a child, and they use these women as ways for them to have children of their own. And the reason I include this case study is because it crystallizes some of these issues of, okay, so what do poor, desperate women do if they can't be in the workforce? Well, they can do this, and this industry is often led by professional women, so that's empowering, and it's a workaround to women not being able to get into the formal employment, and they can make in one 9-month period what it would take half a lifetime or a whole lifetime to make. And yet so that's good, that sounds good. The downside is like, wow, this feels exploitive. These are Western couples coming to India for commercial surrogacy, in part because it's cheaper and the women in India have less legal rights to the child. So it sure feels exploitive, right? And these are examples of other people who have done commercial surrogacy. They've done it domestically. They paid a lot more than they would pay in India. And there's even examples in the United States where couples who have gone through the process have to then go through this awkward formal adoption process of their own child because the legal issues are more complicated. So go to India, do it cheaper, and do it in a way that empowers the Western couples. Boy, that sounds awkward. So then the instinct is, well, we should ban that and get rid of that. And India has done that. And you can understand why they do that, because it just feels exploitive. And yet, it's also, by so doing, you're closing off for many women the only chance they will have in their lifetime to make enough money to be independent, to be free. And these are the places that we visited when we did a semester at sea. And it's still a point of contention because you can see why the people who run this are doing it in some ways in a better way, because it's above board, it's regulated, there are protections. If you just make it illegal, it doesn't vanish, it just goes underground. And then it goes to the place. I'll just show this last clip.
Kashifaka is already a mother of 3. But the baby she's carrying is not going to be a new addition to a family. She is hiring out a womb for cash, just like thousands of other impoverished women in India. They are part of a thriving surrogacy industry that the government now wants to end because of fears of exploitation.
Surrogacy should not stop because it's something poor women can fall back on. Poor people like us, who don't have any agricultural land. We don't even have enough money to buy vegetables.
India has become a top destination for surrogacy since the practice was legalized in 2002. It now generates up to $2.3 billion a year, providing an income to around 2,000 women like Sharmila. She will earn $6,000 once she delivers the twin she is carrying, a fortune for many in India.
I will be able to look after my children, their education, and other things. I will also build a house.
Russia, Ukraine, and some US states also allow commercial surrogacy, but hundreds of foreign couples favor India for its safe and much cheaper services. Recently, the government in New Delhi approved a draft bill banning paid surrogacy. This has caused an outcry and warnings that it could lead to further problems.
Unscrupulous way of doing surrogacy will come up, where everybody will be exploited to no extent. The surrogates, the infertile couple, and what's happening, we don't know. Anything you try to ban totally will happen underground.
Health experts argue that the industry puts the mother's well-being at risk.
There is a likelihood that she may end up having multiple pregnancies as well. Up to twin pregnancy is still tolerable, but then as you know, as the number of embryos increase, that is every multiple pregnancy will have some kind of effect on the mother as well as the baby.
Under the proposed law, only unpaid close relatives of married Indian couples will be allowed to be surrogates. If passed, it would put an end to an industry that has sparked much debate about human rights, poverty, and the ethics of hiring out a woman's body.
Okay. Thus endeth our discussion and analysis of India.